Camilla and William have a complicated relationship. According to author Christopher Anderson, he tolerates her. Camilla has always been a little afraid of William.
According to a trusted insider within the royal family, the air at Clarence House has thickened with an unnatural tension these past few days. Whispers ripple through the corridors in his waning hours. King Charles III penned a clandestine will not merely passing the throne to Prince William, but harbouring a clause that could shatter the fragile peace, a decree that strikes straight at the heart of Queen Camilla's destiny. Those final icy strokes of his pen, unyielding and absolute, threaten to spark a clash unlike any in the annals of the monarchy. William, the anointed heir, Camilla, the woman who walked half a lifetime at Charles's side, and the fading spectre of a sovereign teetering on death's edge, they're all ensnared in a maelstrom of power, where blood bonds, sworn loyalties, and the sacred honour of the crown will be stretched to their breaking point. In the end, this will stand as William's unbreakable shield or a treacherous double-edged blade, unleashing a savage war within the palace walls, and who will claim true victory? William armed with Charles's last command, or Camilla wielding her labyrinth of shadowed intrigues? The silence enveloping Clarence House carried a different timbre from the grand, bustling clamour of Buckingham Palace. It was a heavy stillness, as if it drained the very sound and vitality from anyone who passed through its ancient oak doors. And it was within that solitary hush that King Charles III, heir to a dynasty that had weathered 1,000 years of history, quietly confronted his final moments. The undisclosed but relentless cancer, a spectre that clung like a shadow, had slowly strangled the life from the sovereign. The weight of advanced age and decades of bearing crushing responsibilities had curved his spine further, etched deeper lines into his skin, and though his eyes still gleamed with clarity, they now held a weary wisdom of mortality's limits. In his private study, Charles sat in the worn leather armchair, faced with stacks of dog-eared, hard-bound documents. He had little time left. It wasn't just the doctor's verdict. It was a piercing certainty that seeped into every ache, every ragged breath. The most crucial dossier laid neatly on the green leather desk blotter was no royal decree, but the king's personal will, a document shrouded in absolute secrecy, drafted entirely by his own hand. Every trembling stroke of ink on the fragile parchment bore the gravity of a cold, irrevocable decision, one that would seal the fates of the two most vital souls in his life, and chart the course for the House of Windsor. Handing the throne to Prince William was a given beyond debate. William embodied stability, the beacon of a new era. Yet this will stretched far beyond ceremonial rites. It contained detailed directives, Charles's intimate visions for reforming the monarchy, a ruthless streamlining, stripping away lavish privileges and parasitic members to forge a leaner, more transparent dynasty, one resilient enough to endure a century rife with skepticism. But the most heartbreaking clause and the true political powder keg lurked at the document's end. Charles had wielded words as sharp and unambiguous as a blade passing judgment on his wife, Queen Camilla. Upon my death, Camilla shall hold no official role in the royal household. All titles attendant to her status as consort are honorary only during my reign, and shall be automatically revoked upon my passing. I will not burden this institution with further scandal. This decision is for the realm. It was a ruthless exclusion penned with love and duty intertwined. Charles knew that in the public's heart, Camilla's place would forever be marred by the past's shadow. He refused to saddle William with the draining intrigues of backroom power plays. This was his final gift to his son and kingdom, brutal yet essential. Charles set down his fountain pen, his head lolling back against the chair. It was done. He rang the bell for his most devoted valet, an elderly man named Geoffrey, who had served him since his days as Prince of Wales, entrusting him with the safekeeping of the papers. While Charles sought to impose one last order on his fractured family chaos, erupted unexpectedly from a shadowed corner of the residence. Geoffrey Charles's valet was a man of utmost discretion and unyielding honesty. Yet in the palace's gloom, loyalty wasn't always a straight path. Elise, the elder housekeeper who had served the royals since Charles's marriage to Diana, harboured a covert devotion to Camilla. She had long admired the woman's patience and endurance through decades of tempests, convinced that Camilla alone deserved every hard-won honour. That evening, as Charles retired, Geoffrey secured the documents in the king's safe. In a trifling lapse of age-weakened vigilance as he shut the door, a corner of the will's stiff cover protruded just enough to catch a keen eye. Elise passed by. She wasn't one to snoop, but a woman's sharp intuition whispered of irregularity. Seeing Charles's gaunt decline in recent days, she sensed an ill omen creeping toward Camilla. Moments later, Elise was plunged into horror. She didn't read it all, just skimmed the chilling passage at the end, where Camilla's name and the word revoked blazed in stark relief. The shock made her tremble. Charles wasn't merely sidelining Camilla, he was erasing her from the map of power. She hastily tucked the document back and withdrew. Her simple loyalty to Camilla had ignited into an urgent mission, warn her. Now. Elise waited until midnight, when the entire residence slumbered deeply, before slipping into Camilla's private quarters. The Queen sat in a gossamer silk robe, sipping a late-night tea. The soft, golden lamplight cast her in repose, exuding authority and poise, a stark contrast to the quiet dread she had masked for years. Elise said nothing at first. She knelt at Camilla's feet, breathless, and whispered the tale of what she'd glimpsed, reciting the will's merciless phrases word for word. Camilla didn't erupt. She merely set her teacup down without a sound, but her face, artfully powdered and composed, froze like marble. A dreadful silence flooded the room. Camilla had devoted over 40 years to claiming this perch, battling prejudices, stepping out from Diana's eclipse, finally earning her crown as queen. Now, with one illness and a dying husband's scribbled decree, it all teetered on collapse. Position, prestige, reverence, all illusions, privileges as fleeting as a sleight of hand. Soon the shock yielded to ice. A cruel, sardonic smile crept across her storm-hardened features. Camilla rose and glided to the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded gardens. She was no longer the stunned woman. She had become the strategist, a queen cornered and feral. The will is just paper. She murmured to her reflection, her voice honed sharp as a razor. But the people's heart, the nobles' backing sway over the press, those are true power. Camilla stared at her silhouette in the glass. Still the queen, but under siege. Anxiety forged into iron resolve. She would not drown in Charles's verdict. She would wage war on the heir William. With the scant time left wielding every alliance, every political and media maneuver, she would ensure that when Charles drew his last breath, she emerged not merely as his widow, but as an indelible force, one William would have no choice but to accommodate. The scheming ignited. Camilla gestured for Elise to retreat. The succession war that Charles believed he'd quelled with his will had in truth only just been kindled. She would make William learn that banishing her from the palace would demand far more than a scrawled line on a sealed parchment. The king's final moments with his son unfolded not in the opulent sprawl of a palace, but in the modest confines of the study at Birkhall, where Charles had sought solace in his dying days. He had issued an ironclad decree, no interruptions under any circumstances. William entered, struck immediately by the harrowing transformation in his father. King Charles, sovereign of an empire, had dwindled to a frail shell of a man, his body racked and defiant against the ravages of illness. Charles spoke little. His voice was a rasping whisper, frail, yet laced with the unassailable authority of his lineage. There were no lectures on politics or protocol this time. Instead, he delivered one last imperative. He pressed the will into William's hands, a dossier encased in a deep crimson leather envelope, sealed with the royal beeswax crest, and offered a solitary admonition, uttered like a sacred vow: be strong enough to safeguard the family, yield to no one unworthy. It was no mere counsel. Here, it was a mantle of duty passed from the dying monarch to his successor. Charles locked eyes with his son, searching for an unbreakable pledge, one that brooked no refusal. William accepted the envelope. The rough leather seemed to burn in his grasp, its weight not from the papers within, but from the crush of history and personal obligation. He nodded his assent, wordless, etched in the sudden steel that hardened his sea-blue gaze. Leaving Birkhall, William nearly buckled under the strain. On one side loomed the profound anguish and grief of a son on the brink of losing his beloved father. On the other burned the stark awareness of his destiny. He could not afford prolonged sorrow. The crown awaited, shadowed by an inevitable war. Back at his residence, William broke the seal without delay. He skimmed the clauses on estates and finances, his haste driving him to the heart of the matter, the directives for reform, and the clause barring Camilla. As he absorbed those unyielding lines, a chill slithered down his spine. In his final hours, Charles had revealed himself as a master tactician. He had wielded his own death as a bulwark, transforming the will into a political instrument to enact the sweeping changes he could never achieve in life. William realized then that his greatest adversary in the days ahead would not be external political factions, but the woman slumbering mere miles away, Queen Camilla. Camilla, toward whom William had always strived for civility out of deference to his father, now posed a direct threat to the monarchy's stability and his vision for its future. If the will were unveiled after Charles's passing, Camilla would surely marshal every ounce of her influence, every scrap of support from conservative nobles and sympathetic media, to defy Charles's wishes, sowing discord in the fragile dawn of William's reign. Sensing the urgency of time's relentless march, William wasted no instant. He launched into preparations for the royal overhaul, acting on his father's unofficial blueprint. He summoned his inner circle of trusted advisors, young forward-thinking experts, to draft fresh documents and policies. He mapped out meticulous plans for financial transparency, slashing high-level staff, and phasing out superfluous extravagances, measures that honored his father's will while burnishing his own image before the public, a young king eager to relinquish privileges in service to his people. William's groundwork extended beyond policy. It was a subtle siege of isolation. By broadcasting his commitment to openness and austerity, he erected an invisible barrier, edging out the traditionalists who favored Camilla's brand of steadfast preservation from his sphere of power. Each step, each sketched decree, laid another stone in the path to the looming confrontation. William knew Camilla was no trifling foe. She possessed tenacity, political acumen, and most crucially the years she'd spent fortifying her perch as consort before Charles's decline. Standing at the window, his gaze fixed on the distant palace where Camilla held court, William clenched his fist. The blood of his father, the edict of the crown, the oath to defend the realm, all converged within him. Private torment was shoved aside, supplanted by the unyielding resolve of a warrior. William vowed to honor Charles's intent. He would shield the kingdom, and if that demanded ruthless confrontation with Queen Camilla, so be it, at any cost. After the night she learned of the will, the fragile veneer of peace at Clarence House shattered irreparably for Queen Camilla. She no longer slept soundly. Each dawn brought a clandestine war council convening in the recesses of her mind. She knew the rules of the game all too well. William held the legitimacy of the document, but she commanded legitimacy in the eyes of the public and the covert allegiance of those who craved the monarchy's unyielding status quo. Charles had sought to slay her power with his will. She would slay William's reputation with the court of public opinion. She made no overt moves. Camilla navigated the political shadows with the finesse of a spider weaving its web. Her first target was the press, the weapon that had once demolished her decades ago and now would become her shield and her sword. Camilla never showed her hand directly. She deployed her most trusted lieutenant, a veteran media advisor long retired, but still laced with deep ties to the British press corps, as her conduit. Bribes flowed through labyrinthine, discreet channels, funneled from hefty cash withdrawals in her personal trust funds. Her marks were the journalists and editors at the tabloid giants, those with the power to sway the national mood overnight. Her media campaign unfolded on twin prongs, striking in unison. The first thrust image building. Camilla poured funds into a cascade of glowing profiles. They painted her as a beacon of stability, and the woman who weathered every storm alongside Charles. Editors were coached to wield emotive language, underscoring her sacrifices, her unyielding patience, and her tireless devotion through the years when the public had turned its back on her husband. Rare but meticulously selected photos of Camilla tending to Charles in unguarded domestic moments were leaked, crafting the portrait of a devoted wife, the unshakable emotional pillar propping up a dying king. She wanted the people to see that ousting her wasn't mere politics, it was heartless ingratitude. The second prong, far more venomous, was the smear against William. Articles masqueraded as incisive political analyses, but their true aim was to sow seeds of doubt about the prince's leadership mettle. Camilla's operatives dredged up a trivial, long-buried incident from years past. During an overseas tour, William had faltered briefly, before thousands stumbling over a minor diplomatic protocol. This forgotten footnote was inflated to grotesque proportions, recast as a glaring symptom of leadership frailty. Amto. These pieces posed questions laced with public poison. Is William truly king material or just a polished TV facade? And does his youthful decisiveness come paired with impulsiveness and inexperience? The goal was to cultivate a current of skepticism, shifting the public's gaze from unadulterated admiration to probing uncertainty about his fitness. Nor did Camilla confine her efforts to the printed page. She began quiet lobbying among the aristocracy and parliament. She hosted intimate fireside gatherings at her residence. To conservative MPs, she dangled veiled promises of preserving their privileges and safeguarding their long-term interests from the reckless reforms of youth. To nobles whose families had intertwined with hers across generations, she invoked loyalty and pity, stressing that any threat to her standing was an affront to all they held sacred. Camilla never breathed a word of the will. She spoke only of injustice and short-sighted visions that could cripple the monarchy. With her gentle touch, reassuring smiles, and pledges of continuity, she bound them to her cause. She was forging a solid block of opposition primed to rally in her defense when Charles's will surfaced. In the seclusion of her private study, where she pored over the morning editions daily, Camilla savored a chill thrill of satisfaction. The laudatory articles were gaining traction. Sympathy swelled in the public tide. She had succeeded in forging an emotional armor for herself. Seated before a wall-hung chart of the royal lineage, Camilla allowed a faint smile to curve her lips. It held no joy, only the sly gleam of triumph. The will is just paper. She echoed her midnight vow. I will make the people mine. If I cannot be queen in full right, I will be the queen of compassion. And the power of compassion is deadlier than any decree. The barrage of smear articles targeting William had erupted with such ferocity that it seized his attention at once. This was no random coincidence. It was a covert declaration of war, a brazen challenge to erode the very foundations of his authority, even before Charles drew his last breath. William, schooled in the arts of command, would not tolerate being puppeteered by faceless adversaries in the theater of public opinion. He dispatched his closest confidant, a former intelligence officer now repurposed as his personal security advisor to launch a silent counterprobe into the financial origins and intelligence leaks fueling those pieces. Camilla's web of operations, for all its meticulous camouflage, could never be flawless. The press corps, ever swayed by coin and coercion, always harbored fractures. And indeed, after days of grueling scrutiny, a chink appeared in Camilla's armor of secrecy. A young journalist ensnared in this sordid campaign had begun to quake with terror. He wasn't a glory seeker. He'd been dragged into a vortex of fiscal corruption far vaster than he'd imagined. Camilla hadn't merely bought ink, she'd laundered shadowy sums through phantom charities. Fearing entanglement in a financial scandal that could torch his career, the reporter sought out William's camp of his own accord. In a rain-lashed safe-house on the outskirts of London, one stormy evening, the man spilled the full truth in trembling confession. Queen Camilla herself had funneled a fortune through convoluted intermediaries to purchase the tabloid's pens, all to dismantle William's standing. He surrendered irrefutable proof, encrypted emails, and murky wire transfer receipts. William received the dossier with icy composure. He resolved to strike back without delay, and this opening salvo would be a moral annihilation. Rather than hoard the intelligence for blackmail or veiled threats against Camilla, he chose a bolder path. He weaponized it to transmute her assault into a public ethics bombshell. He funneled the evidence of press buying to a cadre of independent outlets, reputable broadsheets that maintained a prudent distance from the royals and prided themselves on unflinching veracity. The leaks were deployed not as outright accusations, but as tantalizing insider whispers, unmasking the true provenance of the anti-William tirades. The ripple effect detonated like a slow-fused grenade. Whispers ignited across drawing rooms and dinner tables. If Camilla's so pure and beloved, why stoop to bankrolling the headlines? Her image, once the pitiable, devoted wife, flipped in an instant to that of a scheming operator willing to warp truth with cash for illicit gain. At the same time, William fortified his position with diametrically opposed maneuvers. He held public audiences with his cadre of youthful advisers, crisis managers, and image reformers, extraordinaire, articulating a crystalline mandate. We shall erect a monarchy of transparency, one intimate with its people, intolerant of any privilege unchecked. These gestures cleaved a stark schism through the palace corridors and aristocratic salons. The old guard, ever wedded to Camilla and the opulent ancien regime, felt themselves shunted to the margins, branded as clinging shadows of power in the glare of William's fresh gale. The rift yawned irreparably on one flank, William's faction emblem of clarity, modernization, and rectitude. On the other, Camilla's standard-bearer of entrenched tradition, manipulation, and subterranean sway. Tension crackled through every hallway of the residence. The factions no longer skulked in the gloom. They had emerged into the light. Handshakes in the palace grew perfunctory exchanges of glances laced with wary suspicion. In a closed conclave with the royal council to deliberate an impending ceremony, William's voice cut like tempered steel, invoking Camilla's name, without flinching amid the prevailing unrest. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, swept over the assemblage of uneasy nobles. If she chooses open battle, I stand ready in the open. I will not let anyone pervert the late king's final wishes. This is no longer a family quarrel, it's the honor of the realm at stake. The pronouncement served not merely as a gauntlet thrown at Camilla's feet, but as an oath of dominion asserted before the council. The palace had grown frigid, since the leaks about her press-buying scandal broke the atmosphere around Queen Camilla had shifted from wary deference to outright isolation. The nobility's nods came curt and fleeting, courtiers' gazes skittered away. Camilla could feel the erosion acutely. She had lost her internal footing, recast as the emblem of obsolescence and unseemly ambition. But isolation did not break her. Camilla unleashed a fresh media offensive simple in its execution, devastating in its efficacy. She conjured the persona of the grieving widow on the brink, a woman teetering on the edge of irreparable loss. Every public sighting, whether a charity visit or an exit from Charles's bedside at the hospital, was choreographed with precision. She took to somber hues, not full mourning garb, but navy sheaths or charcoal greys that evoked a pall of sorrow. The fine lines etching her face seemed to deepen under the camera flashes, accentuated by the absence of her customary smile. She moved with deliberate languor, clutching her handbag like a lifeline, occasionally lifting a hand to her eye, as if staunching a tear too stubborn to fall. It was a masterclass in theatrics, transmuting her from a suspect political player into a woman ravaged by love's cruel toll. Camilla offered no defense against the bribery allegations. Her silence read as wounded dignity in the face of baseless slander. She let the press dissect it for her. Could this woman, exhausted from fretting over her dying husband, muster the strength to rebut the prince's vicious calumnies? Her most insidious underhand blow targeted William's moral high ground. She quietly mobilized a cadre of veteran MPs and ancient peers to circulate an open petition. Its text eschewed raw power grabs. It was a cunning proposal to retain Camilla's title as Honorary Dowager Queen. The maneuver was a flagrant defiance of Charles' will, cloaked in the veneer of tradition and gratitude for a consort who had served her king. Should William spurn this honorary nod, he would paint himself as callous and unfilial toward the soon-to-be widow who had stood by his father in his twilight hours. The battle for hearts and minds intensified to a fever pitch. The media fractured along fault lines. Broadsheets loyal to William's transparency crusade hailed him as the institution's guardian against graft. But the tabloids, ever slaves to sentiment, tilted toward Camilla. They splashed her anguished portraits across front pages, paired with pitying headlines. Can Prince William find mercy for the woman who gave her life to his father? Camilla had alchemized the fray from a sterile political skirmish into a moral and emotional crusade. Legal victory was no longer her quarry. She hungered for dominion over the public soul. In the privacy of her chambers, where she monitored the pandemonium she'd sown, Camilla sat before her mirror, a weary yet assured smile playing on her lips. She sought no imprimatur from William, nor even from the royal council. "I don't need the throne," she murmured to her reflection. "I need the people's hearts." Now all eyes turned to William. He had proven his resolve, but could he defy the tide of public compassion, the very force Camilla wielded as a widow's sharpened blade? Prince William stood at a crossroads. He could capitulate, bestowing upon Camilla the title of Honorary Dowager Queen, as the petition urged, trading it for a brittle peace in the short term. Or he could champion justice and transparency, steeling himself for a direct assault against the maelstrom of sentiment Camilla had whipped up. King Charles's parting charge, "Yield to no one unworthy," resonated like a tolling bell in his thoughts. William knew that unveiling the king's will transcended mere politics. It was a manifesto for the brand of leadership he would embody. He convened his senior advisers and the Privy Council. Beneath the chill fluorescence of the conference chamber, William rendered his verdict, disclosed the will not in its entirety, but the pivotal clause concerning Camilla. The prince's office issued an urgent press release, followed by a terse briefing. William made no mention of Camilla by name. He simply proclaimed the excerpt from the will, underscoring it as the sovereign's official and final decree. "Upon my death, Camilla shall hold no official role in the royal household." The announcement instantly fortified William's legitimacy. What had been a personal feud between stepson and stepmother now transmuted into the solemn execution of duty, honoring the late king's paramount wishes. In tandem, William unleashed a second strategic broadside. He laid bare the contours of his sweeping reform agenda, full transparency on every royal revenue and expenditure, draconian cuts to superfluous luxuries and a reallocation of resources toward core public service initiatives. It was the perfect foil. While Camilla stood exposed for her manipulations and covert disbursements, William emerged as the avatar of candor and frugality. Queen Camilla's repast was fierce and theatrical, precisely as William had anticipated. She hastily convened an off-the-record huddle with her most loyal stringers. There she branded William as the ungrateful son exploiting his father's frailty to vilify the devoted wife at his bedside. Camilla appealed to raw emotion, underscoring her anguish and the betrayal she endured. Yet this arrow of pathos had lost its edge. The public, freshly apprised by William of her press-buying machinations, now eyed Camilla's tears with skepticism. Pity lingered, but it paled against the stark verity of the king's own script. The confrontation crested when several nobles who had once championed Camilla defected. They could not defy the promulgated will. For the elite reverence for the sovereign's intent was the sacrosanct creed eclipsing any personal allegiance. This mass abandonment struck a mortal blow, stripping Camilla of her last bastion of internal support. The public tide surged toward William, who was now hailed as the custodian of the crown's integrity. The war's denouement unfolded in a taut private summit at Kensington Palace, pitting William against Camilla. No witnesses yet, the political ether carried the tale like wildfire. William entered not as the warm sun, but with the glacial poise of the successor. Camilla clung to her arsenal of tears and plaintive rhetoric invoking the decades she'd poured into Charles, the unseen sacrifices she'd borne. She sought to cast herself as the victim deserving of deference. William remained unyielding, impervious to the pull of sympathy. He sidestepped debates on the past or her affections for his father. He spoke solely of duty and dominion. Confronting her squarely, William's voice rumbled low and unwavering. "You've chosen battle and you've lost it. My father entrusted me with the realm and a mandate to shield the crown from all iniquity. The king's will and transparency to the people outweigh any scheme of yours." In that instant, Camilla grasped the totality of her defeat, not because William lacked heart, but because he had elevated obligation above all sentiment. In the immediate wake of his inaugural oath, William executed the final unyielding stroke to solidify his authority and the legacy of reform. He would brook no loopholes for instability or doubt. William issued a historic proclamation to the nation, not in a blaze of anger or spite, but with an absolute composure that brooked no challenge. The document wove together King Charles's will and the Privy Council's assent. At its core, Queen Camilla was stripped of all royal titles, save those earned through her marriage to Charles, reduced in legal standing to mere widow of Charles. This meant no privileges, no official palace role, and no stipend from the royal coffers. It was a decree without precedent. The public, once riven, now rallied en masse behind William. They beheld not just a young king dispensing justice, but a man bold enough to elevate duty and transparency above the thorns of familial discord. William had proven that sentiment or pity would not cloud his charge to the realm. For Camilla, the edict was political execution. She faced no exile or indictment, but total severance from power cut deeper than any blade. She departed the palace in silence, retreating to a modest estate on London's fringes, sustained by Charles's private holdings rather than public purse. The press dubbed her the shadow of a bygone reign. The people turned away, viewing her as the emblem of thwarted ambition, a woman who had weaponized love and sorrow to seize what was never hers. Camilla, who had battled a lifetime for acceptance, now confronted utter ostracism, a psychic chill more merciless than any cell. William stood tall and resolute amid the throng. He had weathered an inner war as brutal as the clash with his stepmother. In that instant, he was no longer the Prince William of old, the one who flinched at causing pain. He was King William Decisive Steely, the man who had swept away the detritus of yesteryear to pave the way forward. In the ceremony's closing flourish, William took his place on the Buckingham Palace balcony, facing a sea of voices chanting his name. The roar of "God save the King" crashed over him like a wave. He closed his eyes briefly as if attuned to another voice entirely. It was Charles's whisper, echoing from the depths of his soul, "Be merciful but never weak." William opened his eyes, a single tear tracing his cheek, not one of grief, but of duty fulfilled and burdens shed. He smiled then, a smile of dominion and daring. He had sealed an era of intrigue and mistrust, ushering in a new dawn for the British monarchy, where justice and transparency formed the unassailable bedrock of the throne. What stirs in your heart at Prince William's profound metamorphosis? Do you deem his icy resolve unveiling the will and casting Camilla adrift an indispensable bulwark for the monarchy's endurance? Or does it chill you as needless savagery, a forfeiture of the mercy that crowns a true sovereign? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.